The Sterling family's world had been turned upside down in a single afternoon. Marcus Sterling, business magnate and family patriarch, had left his entire $50 million estate to his ex-wife Grace, the woman he'd divorced 15 years earlier. Not his current wife Vanessa, not his adult children Blake and Chloe, who had sided with their father during the bitter separation. His final letter had revealed devastating truths, and in his final months, as cancer claimed his life, he had secretly reconciled with Grace, finding forgiveness he didn't deserve. Now, in the aftermath of the shocking will reading, a family fractured by 15 years of lies faced an uncertain future. Would Grace use her newfound power for revenge against those who'd rejected her, or would Marcus's final act create a chance for healing that none of them thought possible? Grace Sterling stood at the window of her modest apartment. The events of the afternoon felt surreal. She hadn't expected it to unfold so publicly, so dramatically. That had been Marcus's way, though, always with a flair for the theatrical, even from beyond the grave. A soft knock at her door startled her. It was nearly 11 p.m. Who would be visiting at this hour? Grace approached cautiously and peered through the peephole. Her heart caught in her throat. Chloe. Her daughter stood in the hallway, looking uncertain, vulnerable in a way Grace hadn't seen in years. Gone was the poised social media influencer who had mocked her mother's department store clearance outfit just hours earlier. Grace opened the door slowly. Chloe? Her daughter's eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smudged. "Mom," she said, the word sounding foreign on her lips after years of cold formality. Can I come in?" "Of course." Grace stepped aside, her heart pounding. Chloe entered hesitantly, glancing around the apartment she'd never visited. Her gaze landed on a small collection of framed photos on a side table, pictures of her and Blake throughout the years. School portraits, sports events, graduations, moments Grace had captured from a distance, never welcome to participate but always watching, always loving from afar. "You kept pictures of us," Chloe said softly. "Of course I did," Grace replied. "You're my children." Chloe's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she turned to her mother. "I don't understand any of this. Dad's letter, the will, those recordings, everything I thought I knew." Grace approached carefully, like one might a wounded animal. "I know it's a lot to process. I'm still processing it myself. Did he really lie to us about you all these years?" Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grace gestured toward the sofa. "Why don't we sit down?" As they settled, Grace measured her words carefully. "Your father created a narrative that made his choices easier to justify. To you, to himself. It was easier to paint me as cold and unloving than to admit he had betrayed our marriage. But why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you tell us your side?" Grace sighed. "I tried, at first, but you were children caught in the middle of an ugly situation. Your father had custody, influence, and a very convincing version of events. Fighting that battle publicly would have only hurt you more. So you just gave up on us?" There was a hint of the old accusation in Chloe's voice. "Never," Grace said firmly. "I never gave up. I sent birthday cards, called on holidays, attended your events from a distance. I was always there, Chloe, always hoping that someday you might want to hear my side of the story." Chloe looked down at her hands, like the dance recital. "When I was 12, you said you were there. Somewhere, over the rainbow," Grace said softly. "You wore a blue costume with silver stars. Your hair was in a bun with glitter spray. You were beautiful." Chloe's eyes widened in surprise. "You really were there. Third row from the back, left side. I left before the reception so I wouldn't make you or your father uncomfortable." Tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks again. "I've been awful to you," Chloe whispered. "Even today, at the will reading, I was posting horrible things about you online. You believed what you were told," Grace said. "You were a child when the divorce happened. 9 years old. How could you have known any different?" "I'm not a child anymore," Chloe countered. "I'm 24. I could have reached out, asked questions, tried to understand your perspective. Instead, I just kept hating you because it was easier." Grace finally reached out, placing her hand gently on her daughter's. "We can't change the past, Chloe, but we're here now. That's what matters." Chloe looked at their hands, then back at her mother's face. "How can you be so calm about all this? You just inherited $50 million, a company, everything. And you're sitting here in this little apartment, comforting me, when I've been nothing but cruel to you for years." Grace smiled softly. "Because money doesn't change who you are. It only amplifies it. And holding on to anger and resentment has never been who I wanted to be." "What happens now?" Chloe asked. "With the company, the money, with us?" "That depends," Grace said. "On what you want, on what Blake wants, on how we all choose to move forward from here." "Blake is..." Chloe hesitated. "He's confused, angry. He went to check on Vanessa after the reading. She was not handling things well." "I can imagine," Grace said. She could picture Vanessa's rage, the betrayal she must feel, not just by Marcus's will, but by the revelation of her affair with Richard being exposed. She's already talking to lawyers about contesting the will, Chloe continued. She says you manipulated Dad when he was sick, that the will can't possibly be valid. Grace nodded. That's her right. But your father was very thorough. Mr. Hartwell assured me that all the legal requirements were met. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything still settling between them. I deleted them, Chloe said suddenly. The posts I made about you today. And I posted an apology instead, not explaining everything, just acknowledging that I'd been wrong. Grace felt a surge of pride. That took courage. It's the least I could do, Chloe said. Mom, I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. For everything. The word mom sent a jolt through Grace's heart. How long it had been since she'd heard her daughter call her that with genuine feeling. I forgive you, Chloe, she said softly. I forgave you long ago. Chloe broke down then, years of pent-up emotion finally breaking through. Grace opened her arms, and for the first time in 15 years, held her daughter as she cried. Across town, in the lavish Sterling mansion, Vanessa paced the master bedroom like a caged tiger. Designer clothes were strewn across the king-size bed, drawers pulled open, a half-packed suitcase abandoned by the door. She won't get away with this, she muttered, phone pressed to her ear. I don't care if it's after hours, Jeffrey. This is an emergency. I need the best litigation team ready by morning. That woman manipulated a dying man and stole my life. Blake stood in the doorway, watching his stepmother unravel. The woman who had always been so perfectly composed, who had been the epitome of elegance and control for the 10 years she'd been married to his father, now looked almost feral in her desperation. Vanessa, he said quietly, maybe you should rest. We can figure this out in the morning. She whirled on him. That woman just stole $50 million from us, and you think I should rest? The will seemed pretty clear, Blake said carefully, and Dad went to a lot of trouble to make sure it would stand up to challenges. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Don't tell me you're falling for it too. That sob story about your mother being the victim all these years. Your father was confused, Blake. The medication, the pain. He wasn't thinking clearly. He had himself evaluated by 2 independent physicians, Blake pointed out. Mr. Hartwell made that very clear. Doctors can be bought, Vanessa snapped. And even if he was technically competent, that doesn't mean he wasn't manipulated. Your mother saw an opportunity with a vulnerable, dying man and she took it. Blake frowned. Is that what happened with you and Richard? Vanessa froze. What? You and Richard Kensington, Blake clarified. Dad's recording said you've been having an affair for 2 years. Was that manipulation too? A flash of panic crossed Vanessa's face before she composed herself. That's completely different. Your father was paranoid at the end. Richard and I are colleagues. Nothing more. Then why did Richard run out of the meeting the moment Dad's recording mentioned the affair? Blake asked. And why didn't he come to defend you when I called him after the reading? Vanessa turned away, her shoulders tense. I don't have to explain myself to you. This isn't about me and Richard. This is about your mother stealing what rightfully belongs to this family. To you, you mean, Blake said quietly. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? The money. It's always been about the money. Vanessa spun back to face him. Don't you dare judge me. I gave your father 10 years of my life. I stood by him through his illness. I deserve what he built. And what about me and Chloe? Blake asked. You're not exactly fighting for our inheritance. Dad left us small bequests and forgiveness of our debts. Are you contesting that part too? Or just the part that affects you? Vanessa waved dismissively. Of course I'm fighting for you too. Once we overturn the will, everything will be distributed properly. I'm sure you and Chloe will receive what you deserve. The calculation in her eyes told Blake exactly what he would deserve in Vanessa's version of events. Whatever scraps, she decided to leave him. I think I'll pass, he said. I'm going to take some time to process all this. You should call another lawyer in the morning. Jeffrey doesn't sound very responsive. Where are you going? Vanessa demanded as he turned to leave. To my apartment, Blake replied. I need space to think. About what? Vanessa's voice took on a note of desperation. Blake, we need to present a united front against her. You can't possibly be considering taking her side. Blake paused in the doorway. I'm not taking sides, Vanessa. I'm just questioning everything I thought I knew. She's already gotten to you, Vanessa said bitterly. Just like she got to your father. Blake shook his head. Good night, Vanessa. Try to get some rest. As he closed the door behind him, Blake heard the distinctive sound of something expensive shattering against the wall. In the quiet of his car, Blake sat without starting the engine. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. Anger at his father for the deception, confusion about his mother, concern about what would happen to the company, uncertainty about his own future. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a text message he'd received half an hour earlier from Chloe. I'm with Mom. When you're ready, she wants to talk to you too. Mom, not Grace or her, or any of the other distancing terms they'd used for years. Mom. Was it really that simple to bridge 15 years of estrangement? Blake wasn't sure. But as he started his car and pulled away from the mansion, he knew one thing with growing certainty. The narrative he'd built his adult life around had just collapsed, and he needed to figure out what remained true in the rubble. The following morning, Harrison Hartwell's office buzzed with activity. The Sterling will had made headlines in the financial press, and inquiries were pouring in from business associates, media outlets, and curious onlookers. Grace arrived precisely at 9 a.m. as requested, dressed simply but elegantly in a navy blue dress that Chloe had insisted on buying for her the night before. "If you're going to run a $50 million company, Mom, you need to look the part," she had said. Grace had acquiesced, not because she cared about appearances, but because it had made her daughter happy to do something for her. Chloe accompanied her, having spent the night on Grace's sofa after their emotional reunion. They'd talked until the early hours, beginning the long process of rebuilding their relationship, of filling in the gaps of 15 years apart. Mr. Hartwell greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Sterling, Miss Sterling, thank you for coming. I know yesterday was overwhelming, but we have some urgent matters to address regarding the transfer of assets." "Of course," Grace said, taking a seat across from his desk. "And please, call me Grace." Hartwell smiled. "Grace, then. First, I should inform you that Vanessa Sterling has indeed retained counsel to contest the will. They've filed preliminary paperwork, but as I explained yesterday, Mr. Sterling took extraordinary precautions to ensure his wishes would be legally binding." "What does that mean for the immediate future?" Grace asked. "It means there will be some delays in transferring certain assets, particularly the mansion, but the company shares and liquid assets can be transferred immediately. Mr. Sterling established an irrevocable trust for those specific items 6 months ago, separate from the will itself." Grace nodded thoughtfully. "He really did think of everything. He was determined that his final wishes be honored," Hartwell confirmed. "Now, regarding Sterling Innovations, as majority shareholder, you'll need to convene the board of directors. There will be some uncertainty in the company given this transition, and swift, decisive leadership will be important." "I understand," Grace said, "but I want to be clear. I have no intention of running the company day to day. My skills aren't in corporate management." "That's your prerogative," Hartwell acknowledged, "but you will need to establish your authority before delegating." Chloe, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Mom was actually instrumental in building the company in the early days. She has more business experience than you might realize." Grace looked at her daughter in surprise. "How did you know that?" "Dad's letter mentioned it," Chloe said. "And I did some research last night. Your design background, your contributions to the original product lines. The company website doesn't acknowledge it, but the early press coverage does." Grace felt a rush of emotion at her daughter's interest, at this small act of recognition. "Will Blake be joining us?" Hartwell asked, glancing at his watch. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door, and Blake entered, looking tired but composed. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his eyes meeting his mother's briefly before moving to Chloe. "Traffic was worse than I expected. We were just discussing the company transition," Hartwell explained as Blake took a seat. "I'd like to hear your thoughts on that," Grace said to her son. "You have an MBA and you've been working at Sterling Innovations for several years now. Your perspective would be valuable." Blake looked surprised at being consulted. Well, there's likely to be some instability. The executive team respected Dad, but they're a mix of old guard and newer hires. Some will resist changes, others might see opportunity in the transition. "Do you think they'll resist me specifically?" Grace asked directly. Blake hesitated, then nodded. "Probably. Most of them only know the narrative Dad created about you, and business is still a boys' club in many ways. They might not take you seriously. Which is exactly why you need to establish clear authority from the start," Hartwell interjected. Grace considered this, then turned to Blake again. "Would you be willing to help with the transition, to work with me rather than against me?" The question hung in the air. Blake studied his mother's face, searching for ulterior motives, manipulation, anything that would confirm the image of her he'd held for 15 years. He found only openness and a genuine desire for cooperation. "I would," he said finally, "but I have conditions." "Such as?" Grace asked. "Complete transparency about your plans for the company. No major decisions without consulting me. And," he hesitated, "I want to understand what happened between you and Dad. The full truth, not just what was in that letter." Grace nodded. "Those are reasonable requests. And yes, I'll answer any questions you have, though some of it may be difficult to hear." "I can live with difficult," Blake said. "I've been living with lies for 15 years. Truth seems preferable, even if it hurts." Hartwell cleared his throat. "There's one more pressing matter. Vanessa is still residing in the mansion, which is now legally yours, Grace. Given the contentious nature of the situation, how would you like to proceed?" Grace thought for a moment. "I have no desire to force her out immediately. She's just lost her husband, and now her home is in question. I'd like to offer her a reasonable time frame to find new accommodations, regardless of her legal challenge." "That's very generous," Hartwell said, clearly surprised. It's practical as well as compassionate, Grace replied. Evicting her would only escalate the conflict and create public sympathy for her position. I'd rather focus on the company transition and rebuilding my relationship with my children than engage in a public battle over the mansion. Blake was watching his mother with growing interest, as if seeing her for the first time. This measured, strategic thinking didn't match the cold, disinterested woman his father had described all these years. What about the foundation Dad mentioned in his letter? Chloe asked. Did he leave specific instructions for that? Hartwell nodded, producing another document from his portfolio. Mr. Sterling outlined a framework for a charitable foundation but left the details to Grace's discretion. He allocated a significant portion of his liquid assets for this purpose, to be directed as she sees fit. The Marcus Sterling Second Chances Foundation. Grace read from the document. He did have a way with names. Second chances, Chloe repeated softly, like the one he got with you at the end. And the one I hope we're beginning now, Grace said, meeting her daughter's eyes. Blake cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional moment. So what's our next step? With the company, I mean. A board meeting, Grace decided. Tomorrow, if possible. I should meet the directors, establish my position, and outline my vision for the transition. Would you arrange that, Blake? He nodded. I can, but you should be prepared. It won't be an easy room. Few worthwhile things in life are easy, Grace replied. I learned that lesson years ago. As they continued discussing logistics, Grace felt a strange sense of déjà vu. 15 years ago, she had sat in rooms like this with Marcus, planning the future of Sterling Innovations. Now she was back, but everything had changed, including her. The young, idealistic woman who had contributed silently to her husband's rising star had been replaced by someone stronger, more resilient, shaped by years of standing alone. Now she had a chance to reclaim not just her place in the company, but something far more valuable, her relationship with her children. The boardroom of Sterling Innovations fell silent as Grace entered, flanked by Blake and Harrison Hartwell. 12 pairs of eyes tracked her movement to the head of the table, the chair Marcus had occupied for decades. Some gazes were curious, others openly hostile. Most were simply stunned to see the ex-wife they'd heard so little about now standing in a position of absolute authority. Grace took her seat calmly, placing a slim portfolio on the table before her. Blake settled into a chair to her right, his expression carefully neutral. Good morning, Grace began, her voice clear and steady. Thank you all for rearranging your schedules for this emergency meeting. I understand this is an unexpected transition for everyone. Richard Kensington, who had fled the will reading upon the revelation of his affair with Vanessa, was conspicuously absent. In his place, a nervous-looking VP of operations sat fidgeting with his pen. Mrs. Sterling, began Theodore Hopkins, the oldest board member and a longtime friend of Marcus. While we appreciate your courtesy in calling this meeting, I think we're all wondering exactly what your intentions are regarding Sterling Innovations. The emphasis on your made it clear he questioned her right to be there at all. My intentions, Mr. Hopkins, are to ensure the continued success and growth of this company while bringing it into alignment with a more ethical vision for the future. A murmur ran through the room at the implied criticism of the company's current practices. Ethical vision? Repeated Janet Winters, head of legal affairs. Are you suggesting there are ethical problems with how we currently operate? Grace met her gaze directly. Sterling Innovations has been tremendously successful financially under my ex-husband's leadership, but I believe there is room for improvement in terms of environmental sustainability, employee welfare, and community impact. These aren't just moral imperatives, they're increasingly sound business strategies as well. With all due respect, said Hopkins, not sounding respectful at all, what qualifies you to make such assessments? You've been divorced from Marcus for 15 years. The business world has changed dramatically in that time. Blake shifted uncomfortably but remained silent, watching his mother handle the challenge. A fair question, Grace acknowledged. Some of you may not be aware that I was heavily involved in the founding and early growth of Sterling Innovations. The original product designs, the company logo, the initial marketing strategy, those were collaborative efforts between Marcus and myself. Several board members exchanged surprised glances. Additionally, Grace continued, I've spent the past decade running my own small business teaching art and design, which has given me valuable perspective on sustainable business practices. But most importantly, I don't intend to micromanage this company. I believe in hiring the right people and giving them the support they need to excel. Are you planning to replace the current executive team? Asked Michael Williams, the CFO, voicing the fear that hung in the air. Not wholesale, no, Grace replied. I believe in evaluating performance individually. Those who share the vision for Sterling Innovations' future and demonstrate the skills to help achieve it will have nothing to worry about. The tension in the room eased slightly, but wariness remained. These were people who had risen to power under Marcus's leadership, who had adapted to his style and priorities. Change threatened their comfort and potentially their positions. I'd like to introduce a few concrete proposals, Grace continued, opening her portfolio. First, I want to establish a more diverse board of directors, including Blake and Chloe Sterling if they're willing to serve. She nodded toward her son, who straightened slightly at the mention of his name. Second, I propose a comprehensive review of our environmental impact, with the goal of achieving carbon neutrality within 5 years. Third, I want to establish the Marcus Sterling Second Chances Foundation, which will focus on education, cancer research, and support for single parents. As Grace outlined her vision, Blake watched the board members' reactions. There was skepticism, certainly, but also growing interest. His mother spoke with quiet confidence, her proposals thoughtful and well-researched. This was someone who had clearly given careful consideration to her sudden responsibility. "These sound like admirable goals," said Janet Winters carefully, "but they also sound expensive. Shareholders expect returns on their investments, not just good intentions." "Of course," Grace agreed, "which is why I've asked Mr. Williams to analyze the financial implications of these proposals. Michael, would you share your preliminary findings?" All eyes turned to the CFO, who looked surprised at being called upon. He shuffled through some papers, then cleared his throat. "I've reviewed Mrs. Sterling's proposals, and while there would be significant upfront costs, particularly for the environmental initiatives, the long-term projections are actually quite sound. Tax incentives, reduced waste, improved brand reputation, these factors offset much of the initial investment. Additionally, companies with strong CSR programs are increasingly outperforming their competitors in terms of both consumer loyalty and talent acquisition." Grace nodded her thanks. "I'm not suggesting we abandon profitability. I'm suggesting we pursue it in a way that also creates positive impact. The two aren't mutually exclusive." The discussion continued for another hour, with Grace fielding questions and addressing concerns with a calm authority that gradually won over even the most skeptical board members. She didn't have all the answers, but she was willing to listen, to incorporate valid feedback, and to stand firm on her core principles. As the meeting concluded, Theodore Hopkins approached her. "Mrs. Sterling, I owe you an apology. I came in with preconceptions that were clearly unfounded. Your vision for the company is more thoughtful than I anticipated." "Thank you, Mr. Hopkins," Grace replied. "I understand this transition is jarring for everyone. All I ask is an open mind as we move forward." The old man nodded. "Marcus always said you were the heart of this company in the early days. Perhaps it's fitting that you're returning to guide its future." As the boardroom emptied, Blake remained seated, watching his mother gather her notes. When they were alone, he spoke. "That was impressive. You handled them better than Dad would have." Grace looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Your father and I had different styles," he commanded. "I tend to collaborate. Both approaches have their strengths." "The board was prepared to hate you," Blake admitted. "There have been rumors flying since the will reading, that you manipulated Dad, that you're planning to dismantle the company for revenge, that you're going to clean house and bring in your own people. And what did you tell them when they asked you?" Grace inquired. Blake looked down at his hands. "I said I didn't know, that I was still trying to figure out who you really are, after 15 years of believing something else entirely." Grace nodded. "That's fair. I wouldn't expect you to defend me when you're still uncertain yourself. But after seeing you in there," Blake hesitated, "you're not what I expected. You're not what Dad described all these years. Chloe said you talked a lot last night, that you answered all her questions." "I did," Grace confirmed. "And I'm willing to do the same for you, whenever you're ready. I think," Blake took a deep breath, "I think I'm ready to hear your side. About what really happened with you and Dad, about why the marriage ended." Grace studied her son's face, so like his father's, yet with a vulnerability Marcus had rarely allowed himself to show. She nodded. "Why don't we go somewhere more comfortable? This conversation deserves a better setting than a corporate boardroom." They ended up at a small cafe near the building, a quiet place with private booths where they could talk without being overheard. Blake ordered coffee, Grace tea, and for a moment they sat in awkward silence. "Where should I begin?" Grace asked. "The beginning, I guess," Blake replied. "When did things start to go wrong?" Grace took a sip of her tea, organizing her thoughts. "Your father and I met in college. I was studying design. He was in business. We were very much in love and complemented each other well. I was creative but practical. He was ambitious but needed direction. When we started Sterling Innovations after graduation, it was truly a partnership." She smiled faintly at the memory. "Those early years were wonderful. Hard work, yes, but exciting. We were building something together. And then you came along, and Chloe a few years later, and our family felt complete." "So what changed?" Blake asked. "Success changed him," Grace said simply. "As the company grew, so did your father's ego. The more people praised his vision and leadership, the more he began to believe his own mythology. He started staying at the office later, traveling more, becoming less present at home. That's just what successful businessmen do, Blake defended. Building a company requires sacrifice. Yes, Grace agreed. But there are different kinds of sacrifice. Your father wasn't just sacrificing his time, he was sacrificing his relationships. He missed your birthday 3 years in a row, Blake. He forgot his wedding anniversary repeatedly. Small things, perhaps, but they add up. Blake frowned, trying to reconcile this with his memories. I remember him being at my soccer games, my school events. He made an effort for public appearances, Grace acknowledged. Image was important to him, but the quiet moments of family life, dinner conversations, homework help, weekend mornings, he was increasingly absent from those. She paused, deciding how much detail to share. When you were 8, I found evidence that your father was having an affair with his assistant, Melissa. When I confronted him, he denied it at first, then admitted it when I showed him the evidence. Blake looked shocked. I never knew about that. We tried to keep it from you and Chloe, Grace explained. You were too young to understand. Your father promised it was over, that it had been a mistake. We went to marriage counseling. Those were the therapy bills he later showed you, though he misrepresented why we were there. Did you forgive him? Blake asked. I tried, Grace said. I really did. For 3 years I worked to rebuild trust. I thought we were making progress. The company was thriving. You kids were doing well in school. Our marriage seemed to be healing. She took another sip of tea, preparing for the more difficult part of the story. Then I discovered he was seeing Vanessa. She was a marketing consultant hired for a special project. Young, beautiful, ambitious. I found out when I picked up your father's phone by mistake one evening and saw a text message from her that was unmistakable in its meaning. Blake shifted uncomfortably. What did you do? I confronted him again. This time, instead of apologizing, he said he was in love with her, that she understood him in ways I never had, that he felt alive with her. He said our marriage had been dead for years, that I was cold and uninterested in his work or his needs. Grace's voice remained steady, but her eyes reflected old pain. It wasn't true, of course. I had always supported his work. I was part of it from the beginning. But he needed to justify his actions, to himself as much as to me. And that's when he left? Blake asked. Not immediately, Grace replied. I asked for time to think, to decide if our marriage could be saved. I sent him that email he later showed you, asking for space. But it wasn't because I wanted to end things. It was because I needed to process another betrayal. She looked directly at her son. That weekend, while I was staying with a friend trying to clear my head, your father emptied our joint accounts, contacted a divorce attorney, and told you and Chloe that I had decided to leave the family because I didn't want to be a wife and mother anymore. Blake's face paled. He told us you chose to leave, that you said you felt trapped by family life, that you wanted your freedom. I know, Grace said softly. By the time I came home, you and Chloe were already angry with me, already believing his version of events. He had moved with remarkable speed to shape the narrative. Why didn't you fight it? Blake demanded, an echo of Chloe's question from the night before. Why didn't you tell us the truth? I tried, Grace insisted. But you were 11, Blake. You idolized your father. When I attempted to explain, you accused me of lying, of trying to turn you against him. You were a child caught in an impossible situation, believing the parent who remained rather than the one who was suddenly cast as the villain. Blake stared into his coffee cup, memories shifting and realigning in his mind. I remember yelling at you, he said quietly, telling you I hated you, that I never wanted to see you again. You were hurt and confused, Grace said. Children often direct their pain at the parent they perceive as causing it. But it wasn't you causing it, Blake said, the realization settling heavily. It was Dad. He lied to us. He turned us against you to cover up his own affairs. Grace reached across the table and touched her son's hand gently. Your father wasn't a monster, Blake. He was human, flawed, capable of great achievement and terrible mistakes. In those final months, he recognized the wrong he had done and tried to make amends. Blake looked up, his eyes troubled. How could you forgive him? After everything he did, how could you sit with him, comfort him while he was dying? Forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did, Grace explained. It's about choosing not to let their actions continue to poison your life. I forgave your father for my own peace, not for his. And what about us? Blake asked, his voice breaking slightly. Can you forgive me and Chloe for believing him? For the way we treated you all these years? Grace squeezed his hand. Oh, Blake, I forgave you long ago. You were children caught in adult conflicts, believing what you were told by a parent you trusted. The question now is whether you can forgive yourself. Blake's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since he was a young boy, he let his mother see him cry. Grace moved to his side of the booth and put her arm around his shoulders, holding him as he released 15 years of misdirected anger and newfound grief. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered. I know, she said softly. I know. Across town, Vanessa Sterling sat in her lawyer's office. Jeffrey Palmer was the third attorney she'd consulted in 2 days, the first two having declined to take her case after reviewing the facts. "Mrs. Sterling," Palmer said finally, looking up from the papers, "I understand your frustration with the situation, but I must be candid about the challenges we face in contesting this will." "I don't need to hear about challenges," Vanessa snapped. "I need solutions. She stole what should rightfully be mine. Surely the courts will see that." Palmer sighed. "The courts will see a will that was properly executed, witnessed, and accompanied by medical evaluations confirming your husband's mental competence. They will see a clear statement of his wishes, supported by a recorded explanation in his own voice. And they will see the no contest clause, which means if you challenge the will and lose, you forfeit even the $100,000 he did leave you." $100,000? Vanessa scoffed. "After 10 years of marriage, it's insulting." "Perhaps," Palmer acknowledged, "but it's a certainty, whereas a legal challenge offers no guarantees. In fact, based on my review, I would assess our chances of success at less than 20%. Vanessa stood and began pacing the office. "This can't be happening. I was Marcus Sterling's wife. I was with him until the end. That has to count for something. The marital relationship is certainly a factor the court would consider," Palmer agreed. "However, there's the matter of, well, the alleged affair with Mr. Kensington." Vanessa froze. "That was a lie." Marcus was confused, paranoid. Palmer gave her a skeptical look. "Mrs. Sterling, I need complete honesty from you if I'm to represent your interests effectively. Was there a relationship between you and Richard Kensington?" Vanessa's carefully maintained facade cracked. "What does it matter? Marcus and I had an understanding. Our marriage wasn't just about romance. It was a partnership, a business arrangement as much as anything. He got a beautiful young wife to enhance his image. I got financial security and social status." "I see," Palmer said carefully. "And this understanding, was it explicitly discussed between you and your husband?" "Not in those exact terms," Vanessa admitted. "But it was implied. He wasn't a fool. He knew I wouldn't have married a man 30 years my senior if he hadn't been wealthy and successful." "The court may not be sympathetic to that perspective," Palmer warned. "And if Mr. Kensington can be compelled to testify about the nature of your relationship." "Richard won't testify," Vanessa said confidently. "He has too much to lose. His reputation, his position in the company, his position which is now effectively controlled by your husband's ex-wife," Palmer pointed out. "If she were to offer him immunity in exchange for his testimony," Vanessa's face paled. She hadn't considered that possibility. Grace could protect Richard in exchange for his cooperation, leaving Vanessa isolated and exposed. "There has to be something we can do," she insisted. "Some angle we haven't considered. What about undue influence? She was spending time with him when he was sick, vulnerable. Surely that counts for something." Palmer shuffled through the papers again. "The problem is the timeline. According to these records, your husband began updating his estate plan 6 months before his death, shortly after his diagnosis, but while he was still relatively healthy and active. The medical evaluations were conducted at multiple points during the process, consistently showing him to be of sound mind and acting of his own volition." "So you're saying I have no case?" Vanessa said flatly. "I'm saying it's a very difficult case with a high likelihood of failure," Palmer corrected. "And given the no contest clause, the financial risk is significant." Vanessa sank back into her chair, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She had built her life around Marcus Sterling's wealth and status. Without it, who was she? What did she have? "What would you advise?" she asked, her voice smaller now. Palmer considered his words carefully. "If it were my sister or daughter in your position, I would advise accepting the $100,000, negotiating the best possible terms for vacating the mansion, and moving forward with your life. Fighting a legal battle you're likely to lose will only deplete your resources and prolong your pain." "I can't just give up," Vanessa protested, but there was less conviction in her voice. "It's not giving up," Palmer said gently. "It's making a strategic decision based on the facts at hand. Sometimes the wisest course is to accept what cannot be changed and focus on building a new future." Vanessa stared out the window, watching the city bustle below. A new future. What would that even look like? The thought of starting over, of being just Vanessa again, was terrifying. But what choice did she have? Her affair with Richard was exposed. Her claim to Marcus's fortune was tenuous at best, and her relationship with her stepchildren, once carefully cultivated as insurance for her future, was rapidly deteriorating. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course," Palmer replied, "but don't take too long. According to these papers, Mrs. Grace Sterling has offered you 30 days to vacate the mansion voluntarily, with the possibility of purchasing it at a reduced price if you wish to remain there. That's actually quite generous, given the circumstances." "Generous," Vanessa repeated bitterly. "She's positioning herself as the magnanimous victor, while taking everything that should be mine." Palmer closed his portfolio. "Mrs. Sterling, I'll represent you if you decide to contest the will." But as your counsel, I must advise you that accepting the terms offered and moving forward would likely be in your best interest." Vanessa gathered her designer handbag and stood. "I'll be in touch with my decision." As she exited the law office and stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight, Vanessa felt oddly exposed, as if everyone who passed could see her precarious position. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another social media friend had unfollowed her. The exodus had begun the day after the will reading, as news of Marcus's accusations and her affair with Richard spread through their social circle. Fair-weather friends, all of them, quick to bask in her reflected glory, quicker still to distance themselves from her downfall. Her car, a sleek Mercedes that Marcus had given her for their last anniversary, waited at the curb. As she slid into the leather seat, she caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. Still beautiful, still young enough to start over, but with worry lines beginning to form around her eyes. This wasn't over, she decided as she pulled into traffic. Grace Sterling might think she had won, but Vanessa wasn't finished fighting, not by a long shot. 3 weeks after the will reading, Grace sat in a comfortable office. Across from her, Dr. Elena Ramirez, a family therapist with 30 years of experience, regarded her with thoughtful eyes. "How are you feeling about today's session?" Dr. Ramirez asked. "It's a significant step, having both Blake and Chloe join us." Grace smoothed her skirt nervously. "Hopeful? Anxious? We've made progress individually over the past weeks, but being together, addressing our family dynamics directly, it feels both necessary and frightening." A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of Blake and Chloe. They entered together, both looking slightly apprehensive. Chloe had been attending individual therapy sessions twice weekly since the night she appeared at Grace's door. Blake had been more reluctant, but had finally agreed to see Dr. Ramirez after several heartfelt conversations with his mother. "Welcome," Dr. Ramirez greeted them warmly. "Please, make yourselves comfortable." They settled into the arranged chairs, forming a small circle with Grace and the therapist. "I'd like to start by acknowledging how difficult this is," Dr. Ramirez began. "The three of you have experienced a profound disruption to your understanding of your family history. Trust has been broken, narratives have been upended, and you're attempting to rebuild relationships from a very different foundation than you had just a month ago." Chloe nodded, fidgeting with the sleeve of her sweater. Blake remained still, his face carefully neutral. "In our individual sessions, we've each done some preliminary work on understanding our own feelings about this situation," Dr. Ramirez continued. "Today, I'd like us to focus on hearing each other's experiences and perspectives without judgment. Can we agree to that as a starting point?" All three Sterlings nodded. "Grace, would you be willing to begin? Perhaps you could share what these past few weeks have been like for you, reconnecting with Blake and Chloe." Grace took a deep breath. "It's been overwhelming, in the best possible way. For so long, I'd almost given up hope of having a real relationship with my children again. To suddenly have both of you back in my life, wanting to talk, wanting to understand, it feels like a miracle." She looked at each of them in turn. "But it's also been painful, hearing about the stories you were told, the ways your father shaped your perception of me. I've had to confront my own choices too, wondering if I should have fought harder, been more persistent in trying to reach you." "Why didn't you?" Blake asked, the question that had been haunting him. "After the divorce, when Dad was poisoning us against you, why didn't you take legal action, force visitation, make us listen to your side?" Dr. Ramirez nodded encouragingly. "That's a fair question, Blake. Grace?" Grace considered her answer carefully. "I did fight, at first. I had a lawyer, I pushed for joint custody, regular visitation, but your father had resources I couldn't match. He delayed proceedings, scheduled conflicts during my visitation times, and most importantly, he had already convinced both of you that I didn't really want to be with you." She looked at her hands, remembering those painful early days. "When I would come to pick you up, you would cry, beg to stay with your father. Chloe would hide. Blake, you once told me you hated me, that I had abandoned the family." Blake winced at the memory. "I had to ask myself what was truly in your best interest," Grace continued. "Forcing you to spend time with me when you were so resistant would only have traumatized you further, so I shifted strategies. I stayed present in more subtle ways, attending your events from a distance, sending cards and gifts, calling on birthdays even when you wouldn't speak to me. I think what's important here," Dr. Ramirez interjected, "is that everyone was making decisions based on the information they had at the time. Grace, you chose what you thought would cause the least additional trauma to your children. Blake and Chloe, you aligned with the parent who was physically present and who had presented a compelling narrative about the family breakdown. But we were wrong," Blake insisted. "We believed lies, and we perpetuated them. Even as adults, when we could have questioned, could have reached out, we didn't." "That's true," Dr. Ramirez acknowledged. "And acknowledging that is an important step. But dwelling in guilt isn't productive. The question now is, how do you want to move forward?" Chloe wiped away a tear. "I want a relationship with my mother. A real one. I've missed so much time, so many opportunities to know her. And you, Blake? Dr. Ramirez prompted. Blake struggled visibly with his emotions. I want that too, but I'm finding it difficult to reconcile the mother I'm getting to know now with the image I held for so long. It's like I'm grieving the father I thought I had while trying to build a relationship with the mother I rejected. That's a profound insight, Dr. Ramirez said. Grief and new beginnings often coexist in family healing. Grace, how do you respond to hearing your children's desires? Grace's eyes filled with tears. It's all I've wanted for 15 years. To be your mother again, to be part of your lives. I don't expect it to be simple or easy, but I'm committed to the process, however long it takes. I believe this is an appropriate moment to discuss practical steps, Dr. Ramirez suggested. What specific actions might help rebuild these relationships? We've been having dinner once a week, Chloe offered. Just talking, catching up on all the years we missed. And Mom's been teaching me to paint, which has been amazing. Blake? Dr. Ramirez inquired. We've been working together on the company transition, he said. It's been educational. Mom has a different perspective on business than Dad did, more focused on people, on impact rather than just profit. And outside of work? Dr. Ramirez pressed gently. Blake hesitated. It's been harder for me. I'm still processing everything. But we had lunch last weekend, just the two of us. Talked about stuff other than the company, other than the past. It was nice. Grace smiled at him. It was more than nice. It was wonderful. These are excellent beginnings, Dr. Ramirez affirmed. Building new memories, new patterns of interaction. I'd like to suggest another exercise. Sharing stories. Each of you has 15 years of life experiences the others have missed. Perhaps you could each share one significant moment from those years. A challenge you faced, a triumph you achieved, something that shaped who you are today. I'd like that, Grace said softly. Me too, Chloe agreed. Blake nodded, more reserved but willing. As they began to share their stories, Chloe's struggle with anxiety during college, Blake's doubts about his career path, Grace's journey to find her artistic voice, something shifted in the room. The formal arrangement of chairs seemed to matter less. They leaned in toward each other, asked questions, found unexpected points of connection. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, but it was a beginning, a foundation upon which a new family story could be built. When the session ended, they walked out together, lingering in the parking lot as if reluctant to separate. Same time next week? Dr. Ramirez had suggested. Same time next week, they agreed. The morning light fell in gentle patterns across Grace's kitchen table, where she sat reviewing documents for the Marcus Sterling Second Chances Foundation. She had moved from her modest apartment to a comfortable but not ostentatious condo, one with ample space for her painting studio and room for her children to visit. The trappings of extreme wealth held little appeal for her. Security and the means to do good work were enough. A sharp knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Glancing at the clock, barely 7:30 a.m., she wondered who would be visiting so early. Perhaps Blake with the updated company reports he'd mentioned, or Chloe with breakfast as she sometimes did now. The person on her doorstep was neither. Vanessa, Grace said, surprised to find her ex-husband's widow standing there, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit but with unmistakable signs of strain around her eyes. May I come in? Vanessa asked, her tone clipped but civil. I think it's time we talk directly, without lawyers or mediators. Grace hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. Of course, would you like some coffee? This isn't a social call, Vanessa said sharply as she entered, scanning the condo with critical eyes. So you've upgraded, not to the level you could afford now, I notice. I don't need a mansion, Grace replied simply, leading the way to the kitchen. This suits me just fine. Please, have a seat. Vanessa remained standing, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. I'll get straight to the point. Your 30-day deadline for me to vacate the mansion expires next week. I've spoken with 3 different attorneys, and they all tell me the same thing. Contesting the will is likely to fail, and would cost me even the modest sum Marcus left me. I'm sorry to hear that, Grace said, and she meant it. Despite everything, she took no pleasure in Vanessa's distress. Are you? Vanessa challenged. You won, Grace. You got everything. The money, the company, the children's loyalty. Isn't that what you wanted? Grace shook her head. This was never a competition for me, Vanessa. I didn't orchestrate any of this. Marcus made his own choices, at the end as well as 15 years ago. That's a convenient narrative, Vanessa scoffed. The innocent ex-wife, manipulated and maligned, then magically rewarded for her virtue. Do you really expect me to believe you had no influence over his decisions? I can't control what you believe, Grace replied calmly. But the truth is that Marcus contacted me after his diagnosis, not the other way around. He was the one seeking reconciliation, seeking forgiveness. And you just happened to forgive 15 years of lies and manipulation right when he was deciding what to do with his $50 million estate. Vanessa said, her voice dripping with skepticism. I forgave him because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting him, Grace explained. The inheritance was his decision, not something I asked for or expected. Vanessa paced the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. Do you have any idea what it's like? To stand by someone through illness, to watch them deteriorate day by day, to handle the messes and the moods and the medications, only to discover they were betraying you the entire time. The raw pain in her voice gave Grace pause. There was genuine hurt beneath Vanessa's anger, a sense of betrayal that went beyond the material loss. That must have been incredibly difficult, Grace acknowledged. And for what it's worth, I believe you did care for Marcus in your own way, despite the complications in your relationship. Vanessa stopped pacing, surprised by the unexpected empathy. He was a difficult man to love, she said after a moment. Brilliant, charismatic, but always holding something back. I thought it was just his nature, but now I wonder if he was already planning this betrayal. I don't think it was that calculated, Grace said. I think his diagnosis forced him to confront his mortality and reassess his life. The man I spoke with in those final months was genuinely remorseful for his past actions, genuinely trying to make amends where he could. By punishing me, Vanessa said bitterly. By acknowledging truths he had long denied, Grace corrected gently, including the nature of your marriage. Vanessa's eyes flashed. What would you know about our marriage? I know what Marcus told me, Grace replied, that it began as an affair while he was still married to me, that it was based largely on mutual benefit, his status and wealth, your youth and beauty, that you both played your assigned roles until his illness changed the dynamics. And I suppose he told you about Richard too, Vanessa said, a defensive edge in her voice. He did, Grace confirmed. But I already knew. I saw you together at a restaurant in Vermont last winter. I was there for an art retreat. You were clearly not expecting to encounter anyone who would recognize you. Vanessa sank into a kitchen chair, her composure finally cracking. You told him. I did, Grace admitted. He deserved to know the truth, especially given his health. Why should he get truth when he built his life on lies? Vanessa demanded. He lied to you, to his children, probably to me as well. Why did he deserve honesty from anyone? It was a question Grace had wrestled with herself. Because two wrongs don't make a right, she said simply. Marcus's deceptions didn't justify yours. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Such moral clarity. It must be nice to be so certain of the high ground. I'm not claiming moral superiority, Grace said. We've all made mistakes, all hurt people we claim to care about. The question is what we do with that knowledge, how we choose to move forward. That's easy for you to say from your position of newfound wealth and family reconciliation, Vanessa retorted. My reputation is in tatters. My social circle has abandoned me, and I'm about to lose my home. What glorious moving forward do you suggest for me? Grace considered the bitter woman before her, still beautiful, still young enough to reshape her life, but trapped in resentment and entitlement. My offer regarding the mansion still stands, she said. You can purchase it at a significantly reduced price if you wish to remain there. The $100,000 Marcus left you would cover the down payment, and the terms would be favorable. Vanessa looked suspicious. Why would you do that? Why not just evict me and be done with it? Because spite serves no purpose, Grace replied. And because despite everything, you were Marcus's wife for 10 years. You did care for him during his illness. That counts for something. Vanessa studied Grace with narrowed eyes, searching for hidden motives. You're either a saint or you're playing some longer game that I don't understand. Neither, Grace said with a small smile. I'm just someone who's learned that forgiveness benefits the forgiver as much as the forgiven. I don't want your forgiveness, Vanessa said sharply. And I don't need your charity. It's not charity, Grace corrected. It's a business proposition. The mansion's market value is $8 million. I'm offering it to you for $5 million, with favorable financing terms. You can choose to accept it or not, but the offer expires when the 30 days are up. Vanessa was silent for a long moment, visibly calculating. Even at that price, I couldn't afford the ongoing maintenance, the property taxes, not without Marcus's income. That's a fair point, Grace acknowledged. Perhaps selling is the better option for you. A fresh start somewhere new. A fresh start, Vanessa repeated, as if the concept was foreign to her. I'm 35 years old, starting over after a decade as Mrs. Marcus Sterling. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? I was 40 when Marcus left me, Grace reminded her. With 2 children to support and no access to the wealth we had built together, I had to reinvent myself, find new purpose, build a life that wasn't defined by being his wife. It was terrifying, but also liberating. Vanessa looked at Grace with new eyes, perhaps seeing for the first time the strength that Marcus had found so threatening, the resilience that had allowed her to survive the abandonment and rebuild. I didn't come here for life advice, Vanessa said, but the edge had gone from her voice. Why did you come? Grace asked gently. Vanessa seemed to deflate slightly. I don't know. To see the enemy up close, perhaps. To understand what Marcus saw in you at the end that made him throw away 10 years with me. Not an enemy, Grace corrected. Just another woman who loved the same complicated man at different times in his life. And what he saw, I think, was forgiveness he didn't deserve but desperately needed as he faced his mortality. Vanessa gathered her handbag, suddenly eager to leave. I'll let you know about the house before the deadline. As she moved toward the door, she paused, looking back at Grace. For what it's worth, your children speak highly of you now. Blake especially seems impressed by how you're handling the company. He never spoke about me that way. They're remarkable people, Grace said. Despite everything, they found the courage to face painful truths and begin again. That's a rare quality. Vanessa nodded slightly, a tacit acknowledgement. Goodbye, Grace. Goodbye, Vanessa. After she left, Grace remained at the kitchen table, reflecting on the encounter. There had been no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful apologies or promises of friendship. That would have been unrealistic given their history. But perhaps there had been something more valuable, a moment of genuine human connection, a recognition of shared experience despite vastly different choices. Grace returned to her foundation documents, but her mind kept drifting to Vanessa's situation. Starting over at 35, without the identity and security she had built her life around. It wouldn't be easy, but it might be necessary for her growth, just as Grace's own painful new beginning had been 15 years earlier. She made a note to speak with Chloe about potentially creating a program within the foundation specifically for women rebuilding their lives after divorce or loss, education grants, business startup support, counseling services. Not for Vanessa specifically, but for the thousands of women like her who found themselves adrift when relationships ended, especially those who had defined themselves primarily as wives rather than as individuals. It would be a fitting extension of Marcus's concept of second chances, not just for those directly connected to him, but for anyone needing support to reinvent themselves after loss or upheaval. Later that afternoon, Grace met Blake at Sterling Innovations for their now regular strategy session. The company was stabilizing after the initial shock of the ownership transition. Grace's thoughtful approach, combined with Blake's inside knowledge of the organization, had prevented the mass exodus of talent some had feared. The environmental impact assessment is complete, Blake reported, sliding a thick binder across the conference table. It's about what we expected. Significant room for improvement, but not catastrophic. The team has outlined a 3-phase plan to achieve carbon neutrality within 5 years, as you requested. Grace nodded, skimming the executive summary. This looks comprehensive. What's your take on the timeline? Is 5 years realistic? Ambitious but doable, Blake replied. The first phase focuses on the lowest hanging fruit, energy efficiency upgrades, transitioning the company fleet to electric vehicles, revising shipping protocols to reduce carbon footprint. Phase 2 gets more complex with supply chain adjustments and manufacturing process revisions. And the costs? Substantial upfront investment, but with projected ROI within 7 years through efficiency gains and tax incentives, plus the brand value enhancement. Consumers increasingly favor environmentally responsible companies. Grace smiled. You sound like you're actually enthusiastic about this initiative. Blake looked slightly embarrassed. I am, actually. Dad always dismissed environmental concerns as costly PR stunts, but the data is compelling. This isn't just good ethics, it's good business. That's what I've been trying to demonstrate, Grace said. The old model of profit at any cost is outdated. Sustainable business practices create long-term value. Blake nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. I've been thinking about what you said, about the Foundation's focus on second chances. I may have an idea that aligns with that mission while also addressing a business need. I'm listening, Grace encouraged. We have manufacturing facilities in 3 cities with high rates of incarceration and recidivism, Blake explained. What if we created a dedicated program to hire and train formerly incarcerated individuals, provide stable employment, mentorship, career development? Grace looked at her son with growing pride. That's a wonderful idea. Have you researched similar programs? I have, Blake said, warming to the topic. There are tax incentives, but more importantly, the data shows these employees often have higher loyalty and retention rates when given a genuine opportunity. It's a win-win. We get dedicated workers, and they get a real second chance at building a life. Let's develop a proposal, Grace said. We could pilot it at one facility, then expand if successful. It could become a model for other companies. Blake smiled, a genuine expression that reminded Grace powerfully of the boy he had been before the divorce. I'll get to work on it. They continued discussing company matters, but Grace noticed a new energy in her son, a passion that hadn't been there before. The corporate raider mentality his father had instilled was giving way to something more balanced, a recognition that business could be profitable while also creating positive social impact. There's one more thing, Blake said as their meeting concluded. Chloe mentioned you're both coming to dinner at my place tonight. Grace nodded. If that's still all right, she said 7 p.m. It is, Blake confirmed. I wanted to give you a heads up. I've invited someone to join us. Her name is Sophia, and she's important to me. I'd like you to meet her. Grace tried to hide her surprise and delight. This was the first Blake had mentioned having a significant relationship. I'd love to meet her. Does Chloe know her already? They've met a few times, Blake said. Sophia and I have been dating for about 8 months, but I've kept it pretty quiet. Dad was. Well, he had specific ideas about the kind of woman he thought I should be with. Sophia didn't fit that mold. How so? Grace asked carefully. She's a social worker, Blake explained. Works with foster youth transitioning to independence. Brilliant, compassionate, completely unimpressed by wealth or status. Dad thought she was beneath my station, whatever that means. The familiar pain flickered across Grace's face. She sounds wonderful, Grace said sincerely. I'm looking forward to meeting her. Blake nodded, looking relieved. I think you'll like each other. She reminds me of you, actually, the you I'm getting to know now. Strong principles, genuine compassion. The comparison touched Grace deeply. Thank you for including me in this part of your life, Blake. It means a great deal. As they parted ways, Grace felt a surge of hope stronger than any she'd experienced since the will reading. Her son was not only reconnecting with her, but trusting her enough to introduce someone special to him, someone he had hidden from his father's judgment. It was another small bridge being rebuilt, another step toward the family relationship she had thought forever lost. That evening, the dinner at Blake's downtown apartment was a revelation. Sofia Rodriguez was everything Blake had described. Intelligent, warm, with a quiet confidence that needed no external validation. She and Grace connected immediately over their shared interest in art and social justice. Blake tells me you teach painting to women rebuilding their lives after trauma or major life transitions, Sophia said as they settled in the living room after dinner. That's beautiful work. It started as a way to support myself, Grace explained, but it became a calling. There's something powerful about helping someone discover their creative voice, especially when they've been silenced in other ways. I see that with my foster youth, Sophia agreed. So many of them have never been asked what they want, what they dream of. Just giving them space to express that can be transformative. Blake watched the easy conversation between the two women with visible relief. I thought you two might have some common ground, he said, pouring more wine. Chloe, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during dinner, finally spoke up. It's nice to see you being yourself, Blake. With Dad, you were always so performance-oriented. Even your girlfriends were like resume entries, the right background, the right connections. Blake grimaced. I know. I was trying to be what he wanted, always chasing his approval. We both were, Chloe acknowledged. It's exhausting, isn't it? Always trying to live up to someone else's vision of who you should be. It is, Grace agreed softly. I remember that feeling from the later years of our marriage. Nothing I did was quite right, quite enough. A contemplative silence fell over the room, each of them reflecting on the ways Marcus Sterling had shaped their lives, for better and worse. I have some news, Chloe said finally. I've been waiting for the right moment to share it. All eyes turned to her expectantly. I've decided to leave social media influencing, she announced. At least, the kind I've been doing. The luxury lifestyle content, the sponsored fashion posts, all of it. That's a big change, Blake observed. What prompted it? Chloe glanced at Grace. Partly our conversations about purpose, about using privilege responsibly, but also, I'm tired of the emptiness of it all. Posting perfect moments that aren't real, promoting products I don't care about, cultivating an image that has nothing to do with who I actually am. What will you do instead? Sophia asked. I want to focus on the foundation, Chloe replied. The Marcus Sterling Second Chances Foundation needs a full-time executive director, someone who can build its programs, establish its public presence, create partnerships with other organizations. Mom suggested I might be right for the role, and after thinking about it, I agree. Grace reached for her daughter's hand. You have exactly the skills the foundation needs. Communication, networking, the ability to tell compelling stories. But more importantly, you understand its mission from a personal perspective. You've experienced the power of second chances in your own life. Chloe squeezed her mother's hand. I have, and I want to help create those opportunities for others. Blake raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said, for all of us. Later that night, as Grace prepared for bed in her new condo, her phone chimed with a text message. It was from Vanessa, brief and to the point. I've decided not to purchase the mansion. Will vacate by the deadline. Have accepted a position with a former client in Los Angeles. Moving forward, as you suggested, Grace sat on the edge of her bed, considering the message. Just a clear statement of decision and direction. For Vanessa, it represented a significant step, choosing to rebuild rather than cling to a life that no longer existed. Wishing you well in this new chapter, Grace typed in response. The door remains open should you ever want to talk." She didn't expect a reply, and none came. But sending the message felt right. As she drifted towards sleep, Grace reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months after the will reading, Grace stood at the podium of the newly renovated Sterling Community Center, preparing to officially launch the Marcus Sterling Second Chances Foundation. Before her, an audience of community leaders, potential partner organizations, and media representatives waited expectantly. To her right stood Chloe, poised and professional in her role as executive director, a position she had grown into with remarkable speed and dedication. To her left stood Blake, who had taken on the role of foundation treasurer while continuing his work at Sterling Innovations, now as chief strategy officer rather than the heir apparent. "Thank you all for joining us today," Grace began, her voice clear and steady. "The journey that led to this moment has been unexpected and, at times, difficult, but that seems fitting for a foundation dedicated to second chances." She gestured to the building around them. "This community center stands on land once owned by Sterling Innovations, previously slated for luxury development. Today, it opens its doors as a hub for transformation, housing our foundation offices, but more importantly, providing space for educational programs, career training, counseling services, and artistic expression. Our programs focus on 3 key areas: education for underserved communities, support for cancer research and patient care, and resources for families navigating divorce, estrangement, and reconciliation. I'd like to invite my daughter, Chloe Sterling, to share more about our specific initiatives," Grace said, stepping aside. Chloe took the podium with confidence, a far cry from the social media influencer who had once mocked her mother online. "Our flagship program, Pathways to Possibility, provides educational scholarships and mentoring to young people who have faced significant adversity," Chloe explained. "We believe that education is the most powerful tool for creating lasting change, not just for individuals but for communities." She outlined the foundation's other initiatives. "Each of these programs embodies our core belief," Chloe concluded, "that with the right support, people can transform challenges into opportunities, pain into purpose, endings into new beginnings." As Chloe stepped back, Blake moved forward to discuss the financial structure of the foundation, emphasizing transparency, accountability, and careful stewardship of resources. He had worked tirelessly to establish governance procedures that would ensure the foundation's sustainability long after its founders were gone. Grace watched her children with immense pride. After the formal presentations, as attendees mingled during the reception, Grace found herself approached by Harrison Hartwell, Marcus's attorney and the executor of his will. "A remarkable achievement," Hartwell said, gesturing around the bustling community center. "And in such a short time, Marcus would be proud." "The Marcus at the end would be," Grace agreed. "The earlier version might have considered it a waste of good money," Hartwell chuckled. "True enough, he was a different man in those final months. More reflective, more concerned with legacy than with wealth accumulation. Cancer has a way of clarifying priorities," Grace said softly. "Indeed." Hartwell hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. "I have something for you." Marcus left it with specific instructions that it be delivered 6 months after his death, not before. He handed her a sealed envelope, her name written on the front in Marcus's distinctive handwriting, shakier than she remembered from their early years together but unmistakably his. "Another dramatic revelation from beyond the grave?" Grace asked, only half joking. Hartwell shook his head. "I don't believe so. He described it as a private message, something personal rather than legal. I haven't read it." "Thank you for delivering it," Grace said, tucking the envelope into her purse. Whatever Marcus had written, this wasn't the moment to read it. Today was about the foundation, about moving forward rather than looking back. As the reception continued, Grace circulated among the guests, answering questions about the foundation's work, introducing potential partners to Chloe and Blake, ensuring that the launch was successful by every measure. It was near the end of the event that she spotted a familiar figure standing somewhat apart from the crowd, observing rather than participating. Vanessa. She was dressed more simply than Grace remembered, in a sleek black pantsuit rather than designer couture, her hair styled in a straightforward bob rather than elaborate waves. She looked different, not diminished, exactly, but less artificially enhanced, more authentic. Grace made her way through the crowd. "Vanessa, I didn't expect to see you here. I wasn't sure I'd come myself," Vanessa admitted. "But I saw the foundation announcement in the business press and I was curious." "I'm glad you did," Grace said sincerely. "How are you? How's Los Angeles?" "Different," Vanessa replied after a moment's consideration. "Challenging. I'm working in marketing for a cosmetics company. Not as glamorous as being Mrs. Marcus Sterling, but it's mine, my work, my achievements." There was a new quality in her voice, a tentative pride in earning her own way rather than acquiring status through association. That sounds like a positive change, Grace observed. Vanessa nodded slightly. It wasn't by choice, initially. But you were right about one thing. Starting over can be liberating as well as terrifying. She glanced around the community center. You've done remarkable things with the inheritance. This isn't what I expected. Before Grace could respond, Blake approached, his expression guarded as he recognized his former stepmother. Vanessa, he said, his tone neutral. I didn't know you were in town. Just briefly, she replied. I wanted to see the foundation launch. An awkward silence fell between them. Blake and Vanessa had not parted on good terms. Her desperate attempts to contest the will and their subsequent arguments had left wounds that were still fresh. Your mother has created something impressive here, Vanessa said finally. You and Chloe as well. It's not what I would have done with the money, but it has integrity. Coming from Vanessa, this was high praise indeed. Perhaps, Blake agreed. He hesitated, then added, How are you, Vanessa? Really? The question seemed to surprise her. I'm surviving. Building something new. It's harder than I expected, but also more satisfying in some ways. I should go, Vanessa said suddenly, as if the intimacy of the moment had become uncomfortable. My flight back to LA is this evening. Thank you for coming, Grace said. It was unexpected but meaningful. Vanessa nodded, then hesitated. The foundation, the work you're doing with families after divorce. Is it helpful to people? Does it make a difference? We believe so, Grace replied. It's still new, but the early feedback has been positive. Why do you ask? Vanessa looked away. No reason, just curious. But there was something vulnerable in her expression, a hint that perhaps she was thinking of her own family, her own losses. If you ever want to talk more about it, Grace offered, or about anything else, you have my number. I do, Vanessa acknowledged. Goodbye, Grace. Blake. As she walked away, Grace and Blake exchanged a look of shared understanding. Vanessa's journey was her own to navigate, but her presence at the foundation launch suggested she was at least open to new perspectives, new possibilities. That was unexpected, Blake commented. As the last of the guests departed, and the foundation staff began clearing up, Grace, Blake, and Chloe found themselves alone in the main hall of the community center, surrounded by the physical manifestation of their collective vision. We did it, Chloe said, a note of wonder in her voice. We actually launched something that could help thousands of people. This is just the beginning, Blake reminded her. The real work starts now, implementing the programs, measuring outcomes, adapting as we learn what works and what doesn't. Always the pragmatist, Chloe teased, bumping her shoulder against her brother's. Can't you just enjoy the moment? Both perspectives are valuable, Grace intervened with a smile. Celebration and planning, vision and implementation. That's why you make such a good team. They gathered their things and walked together toward the exit. Dinner at my place? Grace suggested. I think this calls for a proper celebration, just the three of us. Sophia's meeting us at your condo, Blake said. I hope that's okay. She wanted to give us space for the launch but is eager to hear how it went. Of course it's okay, Grace assured him. She's practically family now. The word family hung in the air between them, weighted with new meaning. They had been a legal family always, bound by blood and paperwork, but only now were they becoming a true family, connected by choice, by forgiveness, by shared purpose. Shall we order in? Chloe suggested as they reached the parking lot. I'm too tired to cook, and Mom shouldn't have to after today. Perfect, Grace agreed. Something simple and comforting. As they drove separately to Grace's condo, she found herself thinking of the sealed letter in her purse. Marcus's final communication delivered exactly as he had instructed, 6 months after his death, on the day the foundation bearing his name was launched to the world. The Sterling family mansion looked different in warm afternoon light. Once a showplace designed to impress, it was now a home intended for gathering, for connection, for the messy reality of family life. Grace parked her car in the circular driveway, retrieving a covered dish from the passenger seat before making her way to the front door. She no longer felt like a visitor here, though the transition had taken time. Blake and Chloe had purchased the mansion from her 6 months earlier, using a portion of their trust funds combined with modest loans. They had insisted on paying fair market value, though Grace had structured the sale to make it manageable for them. Mom, you're early, Chloe exclaimed, opening the door before Grace could ring the bell. She embraced her mother warmly, taking the dish from her hands. Is this your famous apple pie? With cinnamon ice cream in the cooler in my trunk, Grace confirmed. I thought I'd come help with preparations. First Thanksgiving in the newly renovated house is a big occasion. We could definitely use the help, Chloe admitted, leading the way to the kitchen. Blake is attempting the turkey, and Sophia is trying to diplomatically suggest improvements without hurting his feelings. The kitchen, once a sterile showcase rarely used by Vanessa, who preferred catered meals, had been completely redesigned. Now it was warm and welcoming, with a large central island, comfortable seating, and top-quality appliances that showed regular use rather than decorative perfection. Blake stood before the open oven, a look of concentration on his face as he basted the enormous turkey. Sophia hovered nearby, clearly trying not to laugh at his intense focus. "The secret is consistent basting," he was saying. "Dad always insisted that was the key to a perfect turkey. Your father ordered his Thanksgiving turkeys from a specialty butcher and had the household staff prepare them," Grace commented as she entered. "I'm not sure he ever actually cooked one himself." Blake looked up, momentarily startled, then grinned sheepishly. Another family myth debunked. "Hi, Mom." He wiped his hands on a dish towel and embraced her. Grace still marveled at how natural these displays of affection had become over the past year, after so many years of distance and formality. "The turkey looks perfect," she assured him. "You're doing a wonderful job, thanks to Sophia's supervision," Blake acknowledged, putting an arm around his girlfriend, now fiancée, with a simple engagement ring that reflected her preference for meaning over extravagance. "I merely suggested a lower temperature and more frequent basting," Sophia demurred. "Blake is a quick study. Unlike his father," Grace said with a small smile. "Marcus was brilliant in business but hopeless in the kitchen. One of our early dates, he tried to impress me by cooking dinner. We ended up ordering pizza after the smoke alarms went off. It had become easier, over the past year, to share these memories, the good alongside the bad, the complete picture of the complex man they had all loved in different ways." "Where can I help?" Grace asked, rolling up her sleeves. "The dining room still needs setting," Chloe suggested. "I've put everything out, but I'm hopeless with formal place settings." "Lead the way," Grace said, following her daughter from the kitchen. The dining room, like the kitchen, had been transformed. Gone was the imposing mahogany table that had seated 20 for Marcus's business dinners. In its place stood a round table of warm cherry wood, more intimate and conducive to conversation. The walls, once covered in dark paneling, were now painted a soft sage green, adorned with family photos and artwork selected by Chloe and Blake together. "It's coming together beautifully," Grace commented, surveying the room. "The whole house feels different now." "That was our goal," Chloe said, arranging silverware and napkins on the sideboard. "We wanted it to feel like our home, not Dad's showplace or Vanessa's status symbol." Grace began setting the table with practiced ease. "You've succeeded. It feels warm, welcoming, a place for living rather than displaying." "We've been talking about the future," Chloe said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "Blake and Sophia will live in the East Wing after their wedding. We're considering renovating the West Wing as well." "For you?" Grace asked, continuing her methodical arrangement of the place settings. "Not exactly," Chloe hesitated. "I've been seeing someone for about 4 months now. His name is David. He's a pediatric oncologist we met through the Foundation's Cancer Research Initiative." Grace looked up, delighted. "Chloe, that's wonderful. Why haven't you mentioned him before?" Chloe arranged napkins with unnecessary precision. "I wanted to be sure it was serious before introducing him to the family. After everything we've been through, I'm more cautious about relationships, more thoughtful about what I really want in a partner." "And David meets those more considered criteria?" Grace asked gently. "He does," Chloe confirmed, a soft smile spreading across her face. "He's brilliant but humble, dedicated to his patients, unimpressed by wealth or status. He loves that I run the foundation but couldn't care less about my trust fund or family name." "He sounds perfect for you," Grace said warmly. "Will we meet him soon?" "Actually," Chloe looked slightly embarrassed. "He's coming today. I invited him last minute and was going to surprise everyone, but then I got nervous about springing it on you." Grace laughed. "Sweetheart, nothing would make me happier than meeting someone who brings that smile to your face." Chloe relaxed visibly. "Thanks, Mom. I want to get this right. Relationships, family, all of it." "You will," Grace assured her. "Not because you won't make mistakes. We all do. But because you're approaching it with awareness and intention. That makes all the difference." They finished setting the table together, moving in comfortable synchrony. "Earth to Mom," Chloe said, waving a hand in front of Grace's face. "Where did you go just now?" Grace smiled. "Just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, we were barely speaking. Now we're preparing Thanksgiving dinner together in the family home. With significant others and potential future spouses," Chloe added. "Creating new traditions instead of just reliving old patterns." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. "That must be David," Chloe said, suddenly nervous again. "He's early too." "Go," Grace encouraged. "I'll finish here." As Chloe hurried to answer the door, Grace completed the table setting, adding final touches: small decorative gourds, autumn leaves arranged artfully down the center, candles in simple holders. The formal floral arrangements Vanessa had favored had given way to more natural, seasonal decorations that invited touch and conversation rather than distant admiration. From the foyer, she heard the murmur of voices, Chloe's animated tone, a deeper male voice responding. Then Blake and Sophia joining the conversation. Family forming, expanding, evolving. Grace checked her watch. There was still time before dinner to retrieve something from her car, a special gift she had prepared for today's gathering. Slipping out through the kitchen, she returned to her vehicle and opened the trunk, removing a carefully wrapped package alongside the cooler containing the ice cream. Back inside, she found the group had moved to the living room, where Chloe was introducing a tall, dark-haired man with kind eyes and an open expression to Blake and Sophia. "And here's my mother," Chloe said as Grace entered. "Mom, this is David Williams." "David, my mother, Grace Sterling." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Sterling," David said, extending his hand. "Chloe speaks of you with such admiration." "Please, call me Grace," she replied, taking his hand. "And the admiration is mutual. Chloe tells me you're doing remarkable work with pediatric cancer patients." "I try," he said modestly. "Your foundation's research grants are making a real difference in our clinical trials. The protocols we're developing could significantly improve outcomes for the most vulnerable patients." As they settled into conversation, Grace observed the easy way David interacted with everyone, his genuine interest in their work, his obvious affection for Chloe. There was none of the status-seeking or calculation that had characterized so many of the social relationships in Marcus's orbit. This was authentic connection, based on shared values and mutual respect. "Before we get too deep into dinner preparations," Grace said after a while, "I have something I'd like to share with all of you." She retrieved the wrapped package she had brought in from the car and placed it on the coffee table. "This is a Thanksgiving gift for the house and for our family," she explained. Blake and Chloe exchanged curious glances as Blake carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a framed portrait, a painting Grace had created herself over the past several months. It showed the four of them, Grace, Blake, Chloe, and Marcus, not as they had been in reality, but as they might have been in a happier timeline. Blake and Chloe were depicted as young adults, smiling and confident. Grace was shown with the wisdom of her current years but without the shadow of long estrangement. And Marcus was painted not as the powerful businessman of his prime or the diminished figure of his final illness, but as a man in his middle years, proud of his family, connected to them with bonds of love rather than control. "Mom," Chloe whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's beautiful. It's our family as it could have been," Grace explained softly. "Not to dwell on what we lost, but to acknowledge that we all loved each other, even when that love was distorted by hurt or fear or misunderstanding." Blake studied the portrait, his expression complex. "You've included Dad, even after everything." "Of course," Grace said. "He was flawed, as we all are, but he was still your father. He loved you both, in his way. And in those final months, he tried to make amends, to set right what he could. This painting honors the better man he became at the end, while acknowledging the family bonds that persist even through painful chapters." Blake nodded slowly. "It belongs here," he decided. "In this house that's being transformed, just as our family has been." "I agree," Chloe said. "It's perfect for the living room, where we gather as a family." Sophia squeezed Blake's hand supportively, while David watched with respectful attention, witnessing this significant moment in his new relationship's family dynamics. "Now," Grace said, lightening the moment, "I believe there's a turkey that needs checking, and I should get that ice cream into the freezer before it melts." Later, as they gathered around the table for their Thanksgiving meal, Blake proposed a toast. "To family," he said, raising his glass. "Not just the one we were born into, but the one we're choosing to create together. To second chances," Chloe added, "and the courage to make the most of them. To growth," Sophia contributed, "through challenges as well as joys. To new beginnings," David offered, his eyes on Chloe. Grace raised her glass, looking at the faces around the table, her children, their partners, this expanding circle of connection. "To love," she said simply, "which endures even when tested, which heals even the deepest wounds, which gives meaning to everything else." As they clinked glasses and began passing dishes, Grace felt Marcus's presence, not as a ghost or a shadow, but as the catalyst whose final act of contrition had set in motion this journey of healing. The inheritance he had left was valuable, certainly, but the true gift had been the chance to reclaim what mattered most. In her bedroom that night, before leaving for the gathering, Grace had reread the letter Marcus had left her, delivered by Harrison Hartwell 6 months after his death. Unlike the public letter read at the will reading or the recording meant for their children, this had been truly private, a final communication between two people who had once promised to love each other forever, who had failed in that promise, but who had found their way to forgiveness before the end. "My dearest Grace," he had written, "if you're reading this, the foundation is launched, and you, Blake and Chloe, are embarking on a new chapter together. I wish I could witness it, but knowing it will happen gives me peace as I face what comes next. These past months with you have been a gift I didn't deserve. Your willingness to listen, to understand, to forgive, it humbles me. I look back on our marriage now with clearer eyes, seeing how my ambition and ego destroyed something precious, how my lies compounded the damage for years afterward. I can never undo that harm, but I hope that in death I have created the opportunity for healing that I squandered in life. The fortune I've left you is merely money, valuable, yes, but ultimately just a tool. The real treasure is the chance for you and our children to rebuild what I tore apart. Whatever comes next, know that I died a better man than I lived, thanks to your example. You taught me, finally, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in love freely given, in integrity maintained despite cost, in the courage to face hard truths. Our story wasn't the one we imagined on our wedding day, but perhaps its final chapter holds more wisdom than a simpler tale would have. I leave you with gratitude for your forgiveness, with admiration for your strength, and with hope for the family that might yet emerge from the ashes of my mistakes. All my love, now and always, Marcus. Grace had folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope after reading it. Unlike the public revelation at the will reading, this private communication required no response, no action. It was simply a closing of the circle, an acknowledgement of what had been lost and what might yet be found. Now, watching her family share their Thanksgiving meal in the home where so much pain had once resided, Grace felt a sense of completion, not an ending. Their story would continue evolving with new chapters, new characters, new challenges, but a resolution of sorts to the saga that had begun with Marcus's betrayal and her subsequent estrangement from her children. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the landscape with gentle renewal. Inside, surrounded by love reclaimed, Grace Sterling was exactly where she was meant to be.